OPB Podcasts.
From the Gert Boyle studio, it's OPB Politics Now for July 23rd. We know November is going to be a rematch between Governor Tina Kotek and her Republican challenger, State Senator Christine Drazan. But what we don't know is how competitive the battle will be. One outstanding wild card is the role third-party candidates could play. Today, we'll look at what we know and what we don't know about minor party nominees for governor. Welcome to the podcast. I'm OPB Politics reporter Lauren Dake.
And I'm OPB Politics reporter Dirk VanderHart.
Dirk, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
All right. Dirk, every boomer, Gen Xer, and elder millennial remembers the 2000 U.S. presidential election between Al Gore and George Bush, where a third-party candidate, Ralph Nader, was blamed for being a spoiler. If you don't remember that, Google it or ChatGPT or whatever the kids are doing these days. A lot of people believe Nader was the reason why Gore lost that race and Bush became president. And the race is so memorable in part because despite a lot of talk about spoiler candidates, they actually rarely spoil an election. But we have a third-party candidate this time around who is very clearly hoping his candidacy will hurt Democratic Governor Tina Kotek's chance at re-election. Tell us about Brett Smith.
Yeah, Brett Smith is a 44-year-old Molalla resident. He's got a background that includes working in mills, as a welder, in maintenance, this sort of blue-collar identity he's bringing to the race. He's not new to politics necessarily. He's a former congressional candidate in the state. 2 years ago, he ran for CD5, which was won by Democrat Janelle Bynum. This year, he's secured the nomination of the Pacific Green Party of Oregon as that party's candidate for Oregon governor. You said he's hoping his candidate hurts Democratic Governor Tina Kotek. I'm not sure that's right. He's pretty, I think he's pretty disillusioned with politics in general and would be happy to siphon votes from all over the place. Certainly no fan of Kotek's.
Well, he's kind of expecting that his race might, maybe that was a better way to phrase it.
I think we'll get into that, yeah.
Okay. Because also his politics aren't necessarily what people might typically associate with the Green Party.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Smith is not, at least in my conversations with him, this sort of dyed-in-the-wool Green Party that many people might be thinking of. 2 years ago, actually, when he ran for Congress, Smith was the nominee of Oregon's Independent Party. He became, as he explained it to me, kind of disillusioned with that group. And this year, he was actually considering working with the Libertarian Party. He actually planned to run that party's campaign for governor on behalf of another candidate. That fell through, and Smith sort of drifted over to the Green Party and became its nominee. You know, it is a fairly atypical situation, as you're suggesting. I don't think many people consider the Green Party and the Libertarian Party all that close in their ideals, right? The Greens are concerned about capitalism and its impacts on the natural world. Libertarians tend to be very supportive of the free market wherever it leads. But Smith told me there are similarities. He's running on an anti-war, anti-corruption platform. He says the two parties share those values, and he argues that the only way minor parties can have an impact is by forming coalitions, maybe even between unlikely friends. That seems to be, at least in part, what he has in mind for this race.
Is Brett Smith the only third-party candidate we'll see on the ballot, or do you think there could be more?
So that is the big question, right? That's one of the reasons why we wanted to look into this. There could be more, but we don't necessarily have any reason to expect more either. And that is just part of what makes this interesting. So a quick primer for people who aren't paying endless attention to our minor parties. The state currently has 8 minor parties that have authority to send candidates to the general election ballot. But none of those beyond the Greens are saying that they definitely plan to do that. And in some cases, as in the Independent Party, the party has made a decision not to nominate anyone. I reached out to all of them, spoke with most of them. The Working Families Party, for instance, is going to hold a nominating convention soon. When I spoke to its director last week, though, there wasn't a real vibe that they would have their own candidate. In fact, the only name up for consideration was Governor Tina Kotek, who working families often will cross-nominate a Democrat in a big race like this. So that might be happening there. And others have just not indicated any strong plans. I think a big wild card could be the Libertarian Party. They meet this weekend for a nominating convention. But as I suggested a while ago, they had a nominee for the race that they expected. It was this guy, Matt Rao. That fell through. That was the race that Brett Smith was going to work on. That fell through. It did not sound like they are very assured of having a candidate. The Progressive Party, another big one, obviously a party that appeals to progressives. They actually have to run a candidate in one statewide race this year in order to keep their ballot access. That's a vagary of Oregon law. If you have below a certain threshold of registered voters, as the Progressive Party does, every 4 years you need to have a candidate get at least 1% in the statewide race. So they can either choose Kotek's race, potentially with interesting consequences, or they can choose the race. U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley's up for re-election. They could choose that. We don't know where they're going to go. Anyway, this is a long way of saying, there is just not any clear plan from any of these parties beyond the green to float a nominee. We will know for sure August 25th when the window closes for these parties to nominate someone. But right now, Smith appears to be it.
All right. And let's just say the status quo holds. It would be the first time in nearly a quarter of a century that only one third-party candidate has appeared alongside a Democrat and a Republican in a governor's race.
That's right. And I'm glad you mentioned that because that race 25-ish years ago was interesting. This was in 2002 when Democrat Ted Kulongoski was up against Republican Kevin Mannix for the governorship. That race also included a conservative libertarian candidate named Tom Cox. And when all was said and done, Mannix wound up losing by fewer than 3 percentage points, while Cox got more than 4.5% of the vote. Mannix is now a state representative, as you know, Lauren, and he told me last week that he thinks Cox very likely was the deciding factor in his loss because Cox attracted conservative votes that might otherwise have voted Republican. Another interesting race along these lines is 2010. That's the year that Republican Chris Dudley just lost out to Democrat John Kitzhaber by about 1.5%. But that race, and I didn't realize this until I was looking into this issue, that race also featured two third-party candidates. They were both from conservative parties, the Constitution Party and the Libertarian Party. They claimed around 2.7% of the vote, well over what Dudley lost by. What impact did they have? I mean, this is the kind of question that it's very hard to answer, probably impossible to answer. It's not hard to imagine they hurt Dudley's chances in that race. And so just very interesting to think about.
Yeah, I learned in your story that Mannix ran for governor and got that close to Kulongoski. I did not know that, that he was that close. The state would have been very different. I mean, Mannix has been around forever. He was a state representative when Barbara Roberts was governor.
Former Democrat, went Republican.
Architect of mandatory minimum sentencing measure 11. The state would have been very different had he won over Kulongoski. It's kind of interesting to think about.
And he continues in public service today.
And he's still there today, still there. It is interesting to me that there aren't more third-party candidates in this election, and as you've noted, maybe there will be. But this one just seems like especially ripe to have minor parties. I mean, the Governor Tina Kotek is not especially popular. We've talked to dozens of supporters who seem a bit disillusioned or disappointed with her tenure. Republicans have not been able to take Mahonia Hall, the governor's mansion, in more than 4 decades. I'm just kind of surprised that we're not seeing more enthusiasm from these minor parties.
Yeah, I don't know what to chalk it up to. I mean, I think you're right. There's plenty of political disaffection. Kotek doesn't seem to be running from a place of strength this year. I don't think anyone thinks she's a particularly strong candidate, but the thinking is Drazan may be hobbled by the unpopularity of President Trump, as we have heard Kotek link her to Trump again and again and again. Actually, when you talk to Smith, though, that Green Party candidate, he does bring up both those things as sort of chief reasons he's running. He called Kotek one of the worst governors in the country. He said also, though, that he believes Republicans like Drazan are complicit in failed national policy under Trump. So he's certainly making that case. And again, as you noted, we might see third parties come up. Maybe they'll even come out in droves in this election. But right now, none of the parties seem to be projecting confidence that that will happen.
And there are some examples in recent state history where these third-party candidates are taken rather seriously by the main Democratic challengers. So Go ahead.
Totally.
Jump right in. Jump right in, Dirk. You got this.
Well, when we asked the governor's campaign, you might have a Green Party candidate in this race. If this thing is close, are you worried about that? And they are not suggesting there is any worry right now. But it's fair to point out, as you're pointing out, Lauren, that Democrats have really shown that they take these things seriously in the past. In 2022, when Kotek was up against Drazan again, and also an independent named Betsy Johnson, who we can talk about, or not an independent, a non-affiliated, there was a Green Party candidate in this race, a woman named Natalie Paravicini. Kotek wound up reaching a deal with Paravicini that Kotek would pursue campaign finance reform, which was Paravicini's top issue, if she would get out of the race. Now, you don't do that unless you're worried that someone's going to siphon votes from you in a close race. And that's not the only instance. In 2018, when Governor Kate Brown was seeking re-election, she wound up reaching a very similar deal with the independent party candidate that year, a guy named Patrick Starnes, that she would seriously take up campaign finance reform if he would throw his support behind her. Now, that wasn't quite as meaningful. Starnes only wound up doing that like in late October. It was very, very close to the race, but he did wind up saying, hey, I'm not your guy. All my supporters should vote for Kate Brown. So she got something out of it there. In any case, Dems take this seriously. Even, Kotek's folks are saying they don't take this seriously. I think history suggests otherwise.
Well, and to your point, there are other reasons for these candidates to run because they can sort of leverage some support from maybe a particular issue or...
Yeah, I mean, I talked to a guy named Seth Woolley. He's a Green Party executive. He's a treasurer for the Pacific Green Party. And he said, when you're a third party, you're not going to win a race. But there are a couple things you can do. You can either try to exact concessions from the candidate who's going to win the race and then get some of the things you want. Or you can try to act as a spoiler and maybe they take you more seriously down the line. You're able to push through some sort of election reforms or things like that. I mean, a very realist stance from Woolley there.
Yeah, and not to belabor this point, but I think, they have tried that several times, but we should say that there are definitely no guarantees that winning a concession from a Democrat or a Republican is a guarantee that whatever they want will happen. I mean, I remember very clearly standing in the room with former Governor Kate Brown when independent candidate Patrick Starnes dropped out, and there was a much hullabaloo that they were going to tackle campaign finance reform, which was Starnes' main platform, and look at where we are with that.
Well, I mean, Brown did help or at least supported a 2020 ballot measure that wound up paving the way for campaign finance, campaign contribution limits in Oregon. That was Measure 107. So I think she would argue she did her piece there. I know that Starnes, and seeing him around the Capitol over the years, he's still around. He's still advocating for campaign finance reform, and I don't think he's very happy about the state of things. I think the same is true of Natalie Paravicini, the Green Party candidate who dropped out 4 years ago. Kotek, I mean, we should say, while Kotek was in office, Democrats and Republicans did come together and enact some pretty meaningful campaign contribution limits. Those are kicking in next year. But those same elected officials came together earlier this year and passed a bill that a lot of hardcore reformers like Paravicini believe actually gutted the whole system. So she is very disillusioned with what her stepping out of the race actually led to. And we should say this, just to be fair, she will also tell you she had other things going on personally that led her to leave the race. It wasn't solely that Kotek had made this pledge, but that was part of it.
All right, let's zoom out for a moment. Something that we mention frequently is that it's been more than 4 decades since Oregon has elected a Republican governor. Most people do not really think that's going to change this year. President Donald Trump is not popular, and that bodes well for the governor, Tina Kotek, whose campaign strategy, as you mentioned, appears largely to just repeatedly link Drazan to the Trump administration.
So far, yes.
Is this going to be a competitive race? How many races have we covered where they're like, the Republicans getting very close, and then it just gets clobbered by the Democrat?
I know.
Many.
No, I feel the same way. So, I mean, look, we don't have a lot of polling. The only actual polling we've seen is polling that comes out of Drazan's campaign. So you take it with a grain of salt. It is by a reputable polling firm that's affiliated with Republicans, and it did suggest that Drazan could be leading Kotek 48 to 44%. Now, that is within the poll's margin of error. That is not a definitive thing. I will say that Republicans and folks in Drazan's camp were privately very ecstatic about that. They felt like they had not been ahead like that in internal polling very often, and that this was a real signal that voters know who Tina Kotek is, that they are not taken with the job she's done in Oregon over the last 4 years, and that is really going to come back to bite the governor in November. This is a summertime poll. I don't think a lot of people are going to take it as gospel. And you're right, Lauren, think back to 2022. There were polls that suggested Drazan might be ahead of Kotek in the run-up. That didn't prove to be the case. And Kotek won fairly comfortably. Back in 2018, everyone was saying Newt Buehler, this was a toss-up race. 20 minutes after the first polls closed, Newt Buehler had conceded. It wasn't close. So I, like you, am wary about this trap. And we should also note Democrats have something to gain for acting like it's very close, because that's the kind of thing that generates their supporters to throw in a bunch of money. They get money and they can run their races. So, it is not the worst thing in the world always for them to be saying, this is a really close race, everybody. So I, like you, I'm a little bit dubious, but I do think paying attention to where the Green Party is and whether there is only one third-party candidate in the race that could be pulling from D's is notable, and that's why we did the story.
All right. Thank you, Dirk. Thanks for joining me.
So good to be here.
This week's episode of OPB Politics Now was recorded in the Gert Boyle studio. It was produced by Michelle Wiley, and our audio engineer is Nalene Silva. Our music comes from Audio Network. We'll be back next week with more political news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, you can find all of OPB's reporting at opb.org. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening.